recording. And so we are going to be wrapping up book 2.
Mm-hmm.
And where we left off was Socrates had just been challenged by Glaucon and Adeimantus to essentially provide a believable argument as to why it's better to be just despite not being recognized or rewarded for it in any way, and why that is superior to being unjust and getting away with it and, winning the accolades, winning the respect of the populace. And so essentially make the case for justice being a good in and of itself, meaning a good that's worth pursuing for its own sake.
Perfect justice versus perfect injustice.
Perfect injustice. And so Socrates had essentially decided to answer this complex question by simplifying the visualization, to use a word, of justice by magnifying it. So he wanted to see, well, in order to understand the essence of justice at the individual level, maybe we can blow up justice itself by trying to look at it on a macro level. So let's build a city and let's populate it and let's see where justice arises. I'm paraphrasing at this point. And let's see if in the process of building a just city or attempting to build a just city, can we see where justice emerges? And then maybe that can help us answer the question as to why.
Right.
So we are essentially now at the point of discussion where they've already talked about the fact that you were going to need people to come to an accordance, to start off by essentially building a web of accountability to one another to provide needs. And then during the discussion, there is a shift from a self-sustaining and very sort of simple society to one that's more extravagant and involving luxury. And so Glaucon introduces, or he behests Socrates to include a more a city that's more focused on sort of the finer things in life. And so now there's this, it's a city now that's based not just on needs, but a city that's also based on the wants and desires of the people. And so then there's this interlocking web of wants now superimposed on the interlocking web of needs. And Socrates points out some of the requirements and some of the pitfalls, some of the consequences of trying to build a society that includes those things. And that's where we arrive here, because essentially you're going to need, to put it in simple terms, you're going to need meat. And so you need systems to provide meat. And if you're going to eat more meat, you're going to need more doctors. And if you're going to need more doctors and you're going to need more people, and that you may end up in a situation where you need more resources.
Before we go there, yeah. So
and that's when he says, we are going to have to go to war if we're going to do this.
Well, yeah, there is like there's a straight line that he draws. And I don't know if he mentioned about how he gets to the origin of war here, but it's important to know that there is a choice to go from a simple city to a luxurious city. It is not something that has to happen. It's something that is chosen. Glaucon chooses to say, this life that you described, this simple city that you described, is a life of pigs. I want a life where I want to lay on cushions and eat dessert. And that's a choice. Now, if you look at what Socrates is doing here, he's building a city to explain justice within an individual. That city that he's talking about is you and me. It's an individual.
Right.
That means an individual has a choice to live a simple life, where one's living a simple life, justice is inbuilt. You only use as many resources as you need and not anymore. But once we choose to lead a luxurious life, which is a choice, we like to believe that it's not a choice. That's been thrust upon us, but it's not. Just like Glaucon, we choose to live it. And once we do, that's when we would need the help of a physician, because we're going to be falling sick more often. And not only that, when we choose luxury, this is no longer a just system. Now we have to take from someone in order to provide for ourselves.
Right, because the needs of the society will eventually outgrow the resources that are available to it.
Correct.
And this is where, when societies run into other societies that initially trade But eventually there's going to be a tipping point where there's a disagreement or somebody says, well, I need more of this. And history is rife with examples of wars that really revolve around the distribution and allocation of limited resources, right?
Our lives are rife with this problem.
Yes.
We have because someone doesn't.
Yeah. And so that's where we end up now discussing this idea of war. In fact,
we have to go to war to get from someone.
Socrates says very bluntly and plainly and quite ominously to Glaucon, so Glaucon, we will go to war. So
Yes.
it's almost sort of like Socrates, after hearing Glaucon make the claim that, we need to build a luxurious, comfortable society. Socrates walks him to the point where he says, well, so then we'll be going to war. And if we're going to go to war, we need to have guardians.
We need to have soldiers.
We'll need to have a standing army. We'll have to then make accommodations for that. So where we're going to pick up is where they start talking about what the nature of an effective guardian for this just city would be.
Yes, and so he's talking about having those who will go and take from others what is required by us, and would also defend what is us from others who are coming to take what is ours.
Right.
So both attack and defense. And so Glaucon says, Socrates says, well, if you want to now support an army in this city of yours, you need a lot more resources. Well, Glaucon says, why? I mean, we have so many citizens. Can't these citizens defend? And then Socrates is like, well, you're entrusting everything you own and your entire future on the ability of these soldiers to be able to fight. And do you believe that if you had somebody who was a farmer or a home builder or whatever, do you think they'll have equal ability? Do you think they have equal ability to then take up arms and defend? In other words, we actually formed a simple society based on specialization. We said a farmer will farm and he'll specialize in that because he'll be so good at that. And that's why we'll have the best crops. And we'll have the same thing with the home builder, the same thing with the potter. They specialize. Similarly, we need to have guardians who specialize in what they do. That's defend the city. They would not be tasked with menial jobs or jobs that don't directly lead to this aspect of fighting. And so because he says warfare is a craft,
right.
It has to be specialized.
Yeah, so Glaucon abandons that question very rapidly because Socrates, the idea of the citizen soldier, so much is at stake with what their craft, their domain involves that you're going to need a professional army.
Right.
So then now they get into the stipulations of, what sort of training, what sort of personnel, what sort of individual features, and what sort of indoctrination are we going to have to put these guardians who have this very important job through. So then they get into some discussions about that.
Correct. It's important to note that Socrates doesn't make doesn't make he makes a very big deal about this, and he says that this is the most important thing that a populace would need to be focused on, is making sure that their guardians understand their duty and can differentiate between a threat and something that's not a threat. It's extremely important. And a lot of time and effort has to be spent on that. You need the right guardians. You need to choose the right guardians. And not everybody can be a guardian. There has to be a selection process. People can have tendencies toward being a guardian, and other people don't have tendencies to being a guardian. You've got to find the person with the right tendencies and employ that person and train that person. And it takes a lifelong of a long life of training. First of all, you have the underlying ability, then you get trained, and then you have something like a semblance of the right guardian. Now the question is, if you look at the human, the individual, what does that mean to us? If we are going to form a city inside of ourselves and we're going to protect it with the guardians, that means we have to spend as much time as we can to build within ourselves this force that can determine friend from foe, and first of all, it has the ability to do so, and then gets trained accordingly to be able to tell the difference between friend and foe. We have to build that in ourselves, and that is the most important thing that we need to be focused on.
Yeah, I agree. And so I think, on my reading of this, and it was, I think, on the third read through, that I got the sense that Socrates emphasizes this point for the reason that the army's purpose, the purpose of the guardian, okay, at the city level, is preservation, to preserve the city.
Mm-hmm.
And so in order to preserve a city, you would need guardians who are vicious when it comes to the defense of the city,
Mm-hmm.
And vicious when it comes to the accumulation of resources for the city.
Mm-hmm.
But they have to somehow also be very protective of the city. So, for example, you wouldn't want to have an army of mercenaries who are simply fighting for the pay, or you wouldn't want to have an army of people who just enjoy fighting for fighting, because that could easily have ramifications for the city itself.
They
Because
will turn on to the city.
they would turn on the city,
Right.
and because since what they did love to do is fight, and
Right.
that's their thing, then they could turn on the city, and there would be ramifications there. So Socrates is making this point because it's the role of the army would be to preserve the city, and that requires a very distinct shift. So suffice it to say, you need to have a force of individuals who have as their aim the preservation of the city, and the skills and the means to employ the craft of warfare when it's necessary to defend the city, but not ever betray the allegiance to the city. So
Correct.
it can't be warfare for the sake of warfare. It's got to be warfare that is superseded by the aim of preservation of the city.
That means they have to have competing interests in a way, right?
And they have to be able to understand how to navigate and balance them.
Right, which is very difficult.
Right.
It's very difficult because you're training them to be elite warriors, but they also have to be peaceable and know exactly when to apply force and when not to apply force. And he gives a very good example here. He says that you need to train your guardians to be like dogs. And he says that dogs are the ultimate philosophers. And the reason he says that is because of the fact that if you look at a dog is it guards your house, and one of the ways it does that is because it can identify friend from foe just purely based on whether it knows the person or not. So if you have somebody who frequents your house and the dog gets familiar with that person, the dog is going to behave. Is going to befriend that person. But if there's a person who's never been to your house before, your dog is going to be on guard. Whether that person has malintent or not is not the question at hand. The dog is going to raise alarm when it sees a stranger walk up, and it's purely based on the fact of what it knows and what it doesn't know. It doesn't take into account anybody's opinion. It does not take into account its owner's opinion.
Right. It's the dog is essentially immune to bias, which is why. So the dog purely makes its decisions off of how it's going to behave, off of what it knows and what it doesn't know.
That's correct.
And in that sense, Socrates says that dogs are actually good philosophers because of that reason. Because that is one of the aims of philosophy, is to be able to delineate what is an apparent good from what is an actual good.
That's correct. Or if what's the difference between true and false?
Right.
I mean, that is knowledge. Knowledge is how to
known or
differentiate
unknown.
known or unknown, or true and false. And in the pursuit of pursuit of knowledge is what philosophers are looking for. And what we find is wisdom, essentially, is that we may not know all there is to know about a certain thing, but we know enough to kind of work around it. But before that, he also says that not every dog is a good guard dog. We know that. I mean, even within dogs, there are some breeds that are better than others. So the guardian needs to have a certain predilection for this. You need to find the right guard dog, and then you got to train the dog. similarly, you gotta build inside of you. First of all, you need to have the ability to do it, and then you got to train yourself. And that training is what he spends a lot of time kind of talking about. And we have to kind of look at this training from a little bit of a generalized view. Like when Plato is talking about the training, he goes into a lot of detail about, the type of, media that they should be exposed to and all of that. And a lot of this, the examples that he has are examples from his time, kind of the stories and the music and things like that. We just have to be a little bit more general about it. But there is a direct line that can be drawn between what Plato was talking about, the influence of social media or media.
And now. Right. I mean, and this is the beginnings of the Republic, where a superficial read will give you the sense that what you're reading is a endorsement of a censorship or authoritarian handling of the media that the citizenry, and in this case, the future guardians of the city, are going to be exposed to. So it's very easy to draw a conclusion off of a superficial read that what Plato, vis-a-vis this dialogue with Socrates, is doing is advocating for censorship and authoritarian type rule. But that's not the point.
No.
The point, again, is you have to keep looking at this through the context of the individual reflects the republic, and the republic reflects the individual. And so what you're doing is you're reading an analogy. What you're reading is, again, a magnification of justice that you should be able to transpose down at the level of the individual.
Well said.
So what he's talking about is not so much censorship at a population level for its own sake. What he's talking about is being mindful of your opinions, being mindful of the data,
of the
information,
source of the opinions.
Source of the opinions,
right.
And making sure that you, like a dog, are sniffing, you're examining the information, the knowledge that you're taking in, and drawing your conclusions based purely off of what you know from it, and not blindly accepting what you don't know.
Correct. Being wary of the fact that you don't know. Just like the dog is wary, doesn't care whether the owner is comfortable with this person or doesn't. If the dog doesn't know the person, he's going to be wary. He or she's going to be wary.
There's scrutiny.
Correct.
Right.
And so we also have to be wary of stuff that we don't know about. We should question everything, just like what you said.
Right.
So when we talk about censorship, essentially what's happening here is Socrates says, fine, you find the people who have the ability, and then you train them. And that training takes the form of teaching them, physical training. One is physical training. It's important. And he gets to physical training. But he says, and there's mental training. And the mental training is in the form of music or stories. And music and stories, Music and stories. And let's talk about the stories first. The stories can come into two forms, either true stories and false. That's fiction. And what he's trying to get at essentially is that these are the stories that that society would tell its children. Parents would tell their children. Priests would tell the populace. These are stories that are mythological stories, or come from or religious texts, or some of them are historical facts. But they all come together and create some sort of a narrative. But the book that he's talking about, the one that he alludes to a lot, essentially, is the Homeric poems.
Right.
That's Iliad and Odyssey.
The Iliad.
Yeah. He talks about the Iliad, and he talks about the events that took place in the Iliad. And what he says is that the Iliad, it behaves as if it's a historical text. But he says that no one alive today witnessed any of those events. What we received is someone's opinion of what happened during a certain time. It's an opinion. And what we act on are the opinions of the poet. We are acting on Homer's opinion of what happened. And there's a flaw in that. And he brings out several such examples of these flaws. And what he's trying to create, just a generalized view of this essentially, is that if we tell each other that a great king can also act in a cowardly way, or could be sinister, could be vicious. A god could, be sinister, could be benevolent, could have all of these contrasting personalities. That means it's okay for us to also have these kind of personalities, and that it's somewhat not even expected. It is almost it is something to aspire to have that guile or that cunning or and that conceited kind of a behavior. Now, if one has that inside of them, then can they be good guardians if they don't know what to guard against and what to attack? That is the overarching theme of this.
Yeah, I mean, so to put it another way, the context here is that the Iliad is sort of the lore that people reference in terms of understanding the gods. So if you go through the Iliad, which my son and I are doing right now, the Iliad is rife with examples of the gods behaving in very, I guess you could say, ungodly ways. So there's a lot of deceit. There's a lot of machinations. There's a lot of just very petty behaviors. And if to the extent that you want to create a system of understanding, because again, the context here is how should we teach the early guardians who need to learn the ways of the world and become the preservers of this city of justice. It would do no good, especially early on, to confuse them with these conflicting images of what the ideal pinnacle version of justice is, and at the same time have these entities, these gods that we have on pedestals, and then show them literature that says that these gods behave in very frivolous and immoral ways. And so, again, this kind of gets into the censorship part of things. And so what is being advocated here is that there needs to be a clear distinction of what is behavior that is virtuous, what is action and behavior that is going to be in accordance with justice, and what is not going to be. And so I think what Socrates points out, and that just occurred to me as I was listening, you give your summary of that section, is that I think what he does is he says, in not so many words, that models matter. Your role models matter. And your role models help you with the mentation of things, so how you think about things. So who you look up to and how they behave influences how you think about things, so that you then are able to act in the landscape ahead of you with the challenges and the road of trials that you will encounter. So there's the modeling, there's the mentorship. So modeling, mentorship, and mentation to keep the alliteration. But it's like the point being is that you have to have good models of effective behavior you have to get to the best way to teach in the early phases is by example, right? So you need good examples, you need good standards. And then you need mentors who can point out that standard to you. And then that should translate into influences on how you think about things. And that is the pathway that is being outlined here.
Correct. There is something to be said about subconscious thinking, though. What he's saying is that it affects you subconsciously.
Oh, yeah.
Because because the guardians are so young,
impressionable.
They're impressionable. That's right, and we cannot.
And he doesn't want to corrupt the young.
Well, no, that if you think about it, that's true. Like if you look at how subconscious, our thought process, how we are swayed by certain things that we hear, and the associations that we make, they're not at a very conscious level. It takes a long time to be able to be very confident in the way you think about things. Prior to that, you're not sure. Like we spend most of our lives till we get to a certain stage in our life being unsure. Now, is the pursuit of money, the pursuit of power, is pure injustice or perfect injustice better or worse than the pursuit of justice, the pursuit of the common good? Is very difficult for a 18-year-old or 19-year-old to answer when they are, because it's not because
or a
these are,
40-year-old or a 50-year-old in this case.
well, in certain situations, yeah.
it's,
I'm just saying that you need to have certain level of wisdom in order to be able to do that. But that means what that says essentially is that you cannot answer this question in your 20s. And Socrates disagrees with that. Yes, you can answer that question in your 20s, but it depends upon how you led your life up to that point of time in life. Because if you spent your entire life being bathed in this swamp of, false opinions, then you are now imbibed those that become part of your culture. If you take a child and don't expose that child to any of the cultural norms that exist, that child is not going to come out saying that this is justice and this is injustice and money, power. That's not going to happen. It's a blank slate, and it gets influenced by everything that's happening around it. It's extremely important of what those things are, what those inputs are, because it's subconscious. We like to believe it's a conscious decision that we are making. It's not. This pursuit of money, power, prestige is subconscious because it's been fed to us, and that's what he's guarding against.
The signaling milieu of a society, or the messaging milieu of a society, has impacts on how individuals think at multiple levels. No doubt it has a subconscious influence, and then it eventually has conscious influences as well. And then the other point is that they become cemented. It's hard to break out of them.
You can't. It's very difficult.
Most people, I think, end up in very conventional lives with very conventional belief systems, and there's problems with that because we'll always end up in life challenges, life situations where the conventional ideas, the unexamined ideas, have either led you to the conundrum that you find yourself in, or give you no effective response to a conundrum that you find yourself in.
Right. No, you're so right. And that's the reason why I said that when even after I read this, I find Adiamatus and Glaucon's argument so persuasive. Because when they say that, you're talking about this guy who has perfect injustice, even though he's unjust, you cannot find out that he's unjust. Tell me why that is bad. Tell me why that is still unfavorable compared to perfect justice, where someone is perfectly just and people don't believe this person to be just. The reason why that argument resonates with me, and it should resonate with everybody on this planet, is because that is the underlying milieu in which we are marinating.
Yeah.
And it creates a subconscious. So, yes, can I actively now think why being just and participating in the common good is maybe a better way of living? Yes, I could do it now, but it still requires a lot of energy for me to push against it. My guardians are not like the perfect guard dog. They do not mistrust things they don't know.
Right. The strangers are walking right into the house.
Right. They don't know who to trust, who not to trust. Right. That's the problem with my guardians.
Right.
Inside of me.
We all have that, I think.
Right. And that's because I didn't grow up in a society that was simple. I chose to lead a complex life. And I didn't spend this entire time fortifying my guardians to be able to come to this point where they can make this determination between good and evil or right and wrong. I didn't do it.
Right, because at the individual level, these guardians, I'm trying to say the word guardians, are, you could say, we were talking about this earlier, they're iterations of courage. Right? And so what we're doing now is beginning to sort of understand the dimensionality of virtue. But the guardians at the city level, if you brought them down to the individual, what are these guardians at the individual level, practically speaking? And it's the iteration of courage at the individual level, because it takes courage, especially in this day and age, to examine information, to examine things that are being portrayed to you as the truth. But it takes courage to resist the societal, and I'll use the word pressure, to say, well, this is just how it is. And if you don't understand it, A, there's either something wrong with you, or B, you're on the wrong side of the political argument, or we just can't waste our time with you. Or there's even more sinister forces at work potentially in that dynamic. And so I think it does take courage to stand up to conventional. It takes courage to stand up to convention. And there's very obvious examples in history where people have stood up to convention, and in retrospect, people think, well, yeah, it was very obvious. It was very obvious that Rosa Parks shouldn't sit at the back of the bus. It's very obvious that, slavery should have been abolished. It's very obvious. All these things are obvious. But in the milieu of conventional thinking back then, these were revolutionary ideas, right? It took courage to stand up. But that courage always pointed at one thing, which is this idea of don't accept things simply because you were told that this is how things are. You must know it. And then once you recognize that this is not consistent with a principled view of life, then you have the courage to stand up. And that's what a guardian does. Because why? Because the guardian preserves the individual. If you succumb to convention, you've essentially dissolved yourself like a cube of sugar and a cup of tea within the conventional thinking. And really what makes you, the individual, worth preserving essentially gets lost.
Mm-hmm. It's a very powerful way to think about it. That's true. I have to say that when I read this, I look at it not as a way to influence the thinking of others. It is. I look at it as a way to say that this is how I am flawed. There's a reason why I am flawed. No matter what I do to right this ship and point it in the direction of virtue, I'm still going to miss the mark. And in one way, it's okay. The reason why it's okay is because I didn't realize that this was a choice. The choice of living a simple life as opposed to a luxurious one. The choice of building the guardians inside of me by exposing the guardians to the right information, the true opinion. I spent my teenage years and in my young adulthood, participating in the culture of the time, from hip hop videos to to everything. If you think about it, the consumerism, I want more. I want to establish myself. I want. I participated in it, and I didn't know that it was a choice. And the reason I didn't know it was a choice is because the republic that I am a part of doesn't make it a choice. So in a way, now I can choose to ride the ship. I can aim in the direction of virtue. I may not hit it, but
well, it's even more nefarious than that. And this is I'm actually borrowing from you during our earlier conversation. You're given the illusion of choice. It's like, what else would you want? This is what you want.
Oh yeah,
you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And so you think you're getting what you want,
right,
when you give into peer pressure or you follow fashion norms or any number of frivolous examples. But you're bringing up a good point, because what I was talking about in historical context, there are examples of individuals acting courageously, and then what ends up happening is a societal tipping point, and everything falls into a new path. But practically speaking, on a day-to-day level, what we're encountering are situations where, you're really faced with messaging that is giving you the apparent freedom of choice, but it doesn't take too far of a step backward to realize it's an apparent freedom of choice. In a very direct way, you're being told, no, you want this car.
Yeah.
Oh no, you want this house. You really want this watch.
Right.
Really?
Right.
What does the guardian say to that?
Right.
Right. And so if the guardian is going to let the stranger through the door, then you take it.
Right.
Because of course you want the watch or the car or the house.
Yeah. Yeah. You want the higher salary. You want to make sure that you participate in a system where you're getting you're getting all the luxuries of life, but that luxury comes at a cost, and your guardian doesn't know that what they should protect and what they should fight against, and that's because of of what I have allowed myself to participate in. It is my choice. I can choose to know that what I'm reading, what I'm seeing around me, is in fact someone's opinion. It is the poet's opinion about what actually happened. Yeah. It is Homer's opinion of the gods, and not what gods actually stand for.
Yeah, the depth of this dialogue is so great, because as it occurs to me right now, it's like that's another. There's so many points you could draw from this. I mean, we could talk ad nauseum about this, but this is exactly why Socrates was advocating for the simpler society.
That's right.
Because the cognitive demand and the the availability of truth is so much easier when the society is simple, right?
Yeah,
There's much less suffering through figuring out what is truth, what is right, what is wrong. It is the simple choice of making sure that you have all the luxuries you want. So basically, there's a responsibility with luxury. You want luxury, then if you even want that system to be sustainable, then you must commit to doing extra work to finding the truth of things.
that's right. That's right.
And so, or the other choice is to understand that a luxury is just a luxury. You keep things simple, and now the truth is much more available to you.
How about this? How about not even believing that luxury is an option? When you see luxury, you actually look at it and say, this is an unknown. I need to guard myself against it. As opposed to you walk into it. And just that simple choice of looking at luxury and saying, nah, there's something wrong here. You can protect yourself. You won't even need to now focus your entire life on building this guardian.
Right.
You can use your energies elsewhere and live a simple life, a life full of simple joys and pleasures, and not be constantly on guard with all this extraneous information and siphoning that information and processing that information, which is, if you think about it, we don't do any of that, right? We are passive. We passively accept information. We don't rationally process that information. And even if we do, even if we make a choice to actively imbibe information, to go seek information and break it down and process it, we still do it from a flawed perspective because we made the choice to choose complexity over simplicity. And that choice, even when we made that choice, when we made it to choose complexity, to choose luxury, we didn't do it with the same rigor that we are now using to look at our lives. You see what I mean?
No, yeah, totally.
It starts at a single branch point. There was a single branch point when we chose simple versus complex. In our mind, that choice was never presented to us. But in fact, there was a choice. It was presented to us. And when we broke out of that has branched into this multitudinous choices,
exploding cascade,
exploding. And now we have to choose between, we believe now we have a choice, in healthcare. Now we have come to this point of healthcare, providing healthcare in a just way or an unjust way. It is so complex, as opposed to choosing very early on that I want to participate in the common good. The series of complex decisions we made to get to healthcare, we've already shown a failure of guardians. And now we are trying to build back this guardianship. At least it's a start. I'm saying it's better than ending up, close to your death and then suddenly realizing that your life has been just a series of choices that someone else made for you and you never participated in, not even realizing it was choice. Right?
Yep. And it's and going back to this idea of luxury and affluence, it's almost there's a perverted affluence. There's a perverted luxury of you surround yourself with the comforts of life, but then you can go another level and another level, and it sort of seems like if there's an end stage luxurious mindset is when you reach the point where then you essentially sort of outsource your own critical faculties. You're like, I don't need to know that. There's almost sort of like a fancy ignorance, basically. Like, you don't need to know this thing, right? You could just outsource that knowledge, and then on top of that, you can almost sort of pick the truth that you want to hear from this multitude of different voices that are telling you. And you're being told, well, okay, well, this is the truth you want to hear. Well, here it is.
Here it is. That's right. Yeah.
It's sort of like this, you see what I'm saying? It has this like very insidious kind of corrupting effect.
It has stunted our abilities. And because our abilities are stunted now, we cannot do anything but just pick out the choices that are presented. We don't have the ability to know which choices exist and which don't. That, in fact, there is another choice. We don't have the energy, we don't have the ability. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we cannot regain that ability.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's one of the process of reading a book like this. When we understand just few simple words that this is the problem, the reason why I think this way, the reason why I lead an engrossed, superficial, conventional life is because I didn't train my guardians. And the guardian actually does exist inside of me. I can choose to live simply, or if I choose to not just disengage from this way of living, continue to live like this, I can still build inside me the guardian who can prevent me from making the same mistakes again, making me choose the right things, but realizing the whole time that I am going to be at war. This is a perpetual war started
You've
because
chosen the path of war, and
we
that's what
have chosen
Glaucon
it.
did. So we're right. So you arm your guardians because you're in the path of war.
There's no choice. This is life is war.
Right.
And that is the constant struggle, the struggle between these choices of whatever you are taking for yourself now, you're taking from someone. And what you have, you don't want to give away readily. And that is that constant state of war. And that's why human life is so complex and we are engrossed. See what I mean?
Yeah.
And it is a lot of people, including me, if you lead an unexamined life, you don't even realize that you are at war. And even if you realize you're at war, you don't know which side you're fighting on.
I think that's right. I think that's how people end up in those moments of reckoning where they're wondering, how did I end up
How
here?
do I end up here? Where do I go from here?
That's what I was getting at earlier, is that with the conventional mindset, you could be on a crash course for a reckoning and not even be aware of it. And then once you hit that, what'll happen is that the toolkit that conventional thinking has provided you will completely fail. It'll not even become close to equipping you for the challenge that you're facing. And then you will realize the deficiencies that have not only brought you to this point, but are actually going to be of no use to you in terms of coming out of the other side of it.
That is still coming to that point of reckoning, moment of crisis, and realizing that the tools that were handed to you are not fit for the job is actually a good start.
Great.
Then you can start building the toolkit. Right?
You and I talk about this. This is why crises are awesome.
That's the reason. And then you could start, you could participate in the great conversation, the foundations of moral obligation, a course like this, right? Which will tell you why you didn't have the tools and what tools you need. You see what I mean? That's the reason. That's the reason why we are doing what we're doing.
To preserve yourself, to preserve the city, and understand that you and the city, the separation between the two things is semantic. You really are one.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you comport yourself like a citizen of the just city, regardless of where you live, that's the way to go.
But see, even the idea of the just city, right, comes from reading or participating in the great conversation.
For sure.
I mean, that's the reason to do this. This is not a book club where you and me are just going over the Homeric, or whatever, the Platonic dialogues.
Right.
This is about figuring out how to live our lives, how to answer the questions, how to fight, how to, what is this war? What are the tools? Who are the guardians? And how do I build these?
And what's at stake?
What?
And that's the case. And that's the case that Socrates is going to make in the following books. Because we still haven't answered the question, and we'll eventually get there.
Yeah, we'll eventually get there.
But why is justice as a good for its own sake?
And that's just the fact that we are participating in this curriculum. This is a start.
It's a good
coming
reminder.
Back, yes,
it's a good reminder to the people listening why this is exactly why we're doing this.
Because you could come to this moment of reckoning and not even realize that there is a choice, the choice of actually participating in the great conversation. Because one could come to a moment of crisis and make a conventional choice, make the same wrong decisions that they've been making, and thinking that it is in fact a choice, but it's not a choice. These choices have been presented to you. These are not choices that you came up with, like the Corvette and the new job or a new spouse is a way of dealing with the moment of crisis, as opposed to building the guardians.
Right. They treat the problem that was caused by engrossment with new engrossments. And that's the problem. And to me, that's the most tragic thing when that happens, is that when people arrive at the moment of crisis and they respond with a reversion back into conventional thinking, I think it's a missed opportunity. But in a strange way, I can't blame them, and it's because they didn't see. Because speaking from my own experience, it was when I was steeped in these philosophical concepts. As soon as I saw there was a moment. I think we even had a
Yeah.
conversation. I said, "This cannot be. I can't unsee this. I know this now. There's no turning back.
Yeah.
It would be a completely irrational of me to turn back. It's just not going to happen. The bridge steps behind me are gone. There's only this path forward at this point. And it took me understanding and seeing this to realize that, I was very much a conventional thinker up until I realized that I had been living a very unexamined life at this point, up to this point. And so now it's a matter of trying to change how I think about things, not worrying so much about what I think, but how I think. And that's the idea of the guardians, right? So having guardians that put a priority on what is known and what is unknown, and basing the choices of your thoughts and actions off of that fact.
And building the guardians and knowing full well that, we have lived a conventional life thus far. We have subconscious biases that we carry with us that we cannot change. So the decisions that we make, they may seem to be the right decisions, but we still have to doubt those decisions. Unlike the Socratic guardian who has the ability and has the training, we don't have that. We probably don't have the ability, and we don't have the training. We have to build. We are going back to the nascency. The moment of crisis leads to the moment of awakening, and that moment of awakening, I've said this to you before. That was the day that I was born.
Yeah.
I was born at the age of 38. The reason is because that's the first time I realized I don't know anything. When you say that to yourself, that's your guardian saying. Your guardian says, I don't know what is right and what is wrong. And you then set yourself on that path, but it's too late. Sometimes it may be too late. I don't know, but at least I can go with the information that I could still be wrong in the decisions that I make. But this decision, the decision of participating in the great conversation for me, has been like it's been for you. It's been eye-opening. At least it got me to this point where I realized I didn't know anything, which I think this is a great start.
That's great. This was a great evening, man. We had dinner, we had leftover Thanksgiving food for dinner, and had some apple pie a la mode, and here we are talking about the great conversation, man. It just doesn't get better.
Simple life.
This would be a good pause point, I think.
Yeah,
and then we'll just
I
move
agree.
on. All right,
man.